Hi there, it's Llarold. Today I'm going to talk about patch 10.1.5, which is coming out July 11th in the Western Hemisphere and July 12th in the Eastern Hemisphere. That's about 3 days away from the time that I'm recording this. There's a ton of stuff happening in this patch. It's going to be absolutely amazing and huge, so let's just get right into it. And we'll start with the biggest news first, Augmentation Evoker. When rumors about a new Evoker spec being data mined had started to float around, I didn't believe it. I couldn't. Just from a marketing perspective, there's no way that Blizzard would drop something so big and important as a new spec, a new type of spec, a hybrid buff class in the middle of an expansion, in a 0.5 patch no less. It's a huge new thing. It's not a unique concept in video games or in the MMO genre, but for WoW, this is treading new ground. The idea that they would bring some huge marketable feature like that in, just kind of in a 0.5 patch, that's insane to me, but it's happening. Augmentation Evoker is a buff spec. It deals damage and it fits into groups in the DPS role, but it doesn't really do much damage on its own. It's about like a blood DK in terms of damage. Basically the lowest damage you can do while still technically hitting mobs. Instead, what it does is it buffs the rest of the group. Ebon Might is the main Augmentation Evoker buff, and it causes you to increase 4 nearby allies' primary stat by a percentage of your own intelligence. All of the stuff that Evoker has, Augmentation Evoker has, is kind of tuned around 4 targets at a time. So you might want to have multiple of them in raid, but generally speaking, one of them in a Mythic Plus group, dungeon group, kind of all you need. A lot of your other rotational abilities will extend the duration of that Ebon Might, and some of your other buffs as well. Some other skills, like the augmentation specific version of Deep Breath, which is called Breath of Eons, grant Ebon Might to allies for free. In keeping with that theme of Augmentation Evoker, Breath of Eons doesn't do damage like Deep Breath does. Instead, it debuffs the enemies so that they take an extra 15% damage from the allies who you've affected with Ebon Might, and that lasts for 10 seconds. And then depending on your talent setup, you can make it so that that damage also generates shields for your allies. You can make it so that you stagger 50% of any damage you take during the time when you're casting that Breath of Eons. So no more of the, oops, I deep breathed and died call out that we hear all the time from Devastation Evokers. That all fits really nicely with the theme of the Aug Evoker. It deals some damage, not a ton on its own, but it buffs everyone else's damage. It has great defensive value for the group. It has like great mobility utility for the group, and it has external cooldowns for tanks. It resets other players' cooldowns, it resets its own cooldowns, and just to top all of that off, it has a cheat death very high in its talent tree, so it's very easy to get. Just a very tanky class on top of all this amazing group utility. People will want them around. In terms of whether it's actually good, I don't know. I think so, but I don't really know. No one can really say with 100% certainty that Aug Evoker will be good numerically in future raid tiers or Mythic Plus seasons, because Blizzard could just make changes to make it too weak to be competitive, or go the opposite direction and make it so strong you have to have them around. I would expect, and their intention is, to make it pretty good, but not mandatory. I will say that in the very first iteration of the class, the amount of damage it added, even when played poorly, and assuming you would only personally do less damage than a Blood DK, like about as much damage as a very mediocre Blood DK, the damage you added to the group, combining your own actual personal damage and the damage increases that you were adding to 4 other players, was around 180,000 DPS in single target. That absolutely obliterates every main DPS spec, so it was definitely too high. Those numbers have been tuned down a bit, as I understand, but the utility is still extremely strong, to the point that the damage contribution, even if it wasn't super duper competitive, I still think you would want some around, but it does seem like it is competitive at this point. In general, I think Aug Evoker is going to be a very strong spec that everyone's going to love having in their groups. I know that I will. They add so much defensive value, they add so much burst damage value, which is really good. and so much healing and crowd control that I think it's going to be a very popular spec. Even after the initial rush of players to try the new thing has faded out a bit, I think Augmentation Evoker is going to be a staple of successful groups and raids and Mythic Plus dungeons for years to come, for however much longer WoW exists. I don't know if this is going to be the first of many buff specs, or if this just remains a singular, unique unicorn. I guess we'll find out together as we wait for Blizzard to decide what they're going to do over however much longer the game exists. Forever, I hope. The only real downside I see to Augmentation Evoker, like literally the only downside I see at all, is that the damage isn't actually very good. So if you want to go solo stuff as an Augmentation Evoker, it's basically the same as soloing content as like a healer, like a Mistweaver monk. I'd rather not do that. The positive though is that Devastation Evoker is very fun. I finally leveled mine up to 70 just recently, and it rocks. It's super fun, super simple, super mobile, super tanky. Great DPS spec. One of my favorites. Kind of feels like a combination of some of my other favorite ranged DPS specs: Elemental Shaman, Arcane Mage, and Fire Mage. Kind of a nice blend of those three, and you know, it's really not that hard to swap from Aug Evoker to Devastation Evoker to go do stuff solo out in the world, and then swap back to Aug Evoker for groups. Really no downside here. There's also a new mega dungeon being introduced in the patch, and this is kind of the big draw of the patch for everybody who plays the game. It's called Dawn of the Infinites. Dawn of the Infinites is an 8-boss dungeon that drops hero track gear at 437 item level. So it drops at a fairly high base item level, but it can be upgraded one more time to reach that max of 441 item level. This won't be a Mythic Plus dungeon when it's first introduced, but if the last 3 expansions have taught us anything at all, it's that Dawn of the Infinites will 1,000,000,000% be split into and included in the list of Mythic Plus dungeons in either Season 3 or Season 4. My money would be on Season 3. So get familiar with this dungeon while it's not timed, so that you can smash it once it is in the Mythic Plus rotation. I haven't had the chance to do it yet. Finding people to play together in a 0.5 patch PTR is very tough. But I have heard from some friends who banded together and ran it, and they said that it was insanely difficult at first. The tank debuff on the first boss made tanks take like a 1,000% more damage or 700% more damage while they were debuffed with this healing absorb that hit for like multiple millions of healing absorb. It was truly overtuned. It was basically like a mythic raid for 5 people, and the final boss I think took them over 11 minutes to kill. Now, it has been nerfed substantially since that run, and it seems like it is expected to just be more like past mega dungeons such as Mechagon or Tazavesh. A little hard at first. The first couple of times that you do it, it might be a bit tough, but not too bad and very rewarding for the time spent. You know, getting high-level heroic gear out of essentially a dungeon that's not timed is very rewarding, and you can't complain about that. Very good for alts. And I'll definitely be in there. Also, the bosses and items from this dungeon just look really cool. It is Infinite Dragonflight themed dungeon, so I really can't wait to get in there and explore. On the subject of gear, Blizzard is adding a new upgrade track to items. Now, they've said that they're pretty happy with the way the item upgrade system has worked in patch 10.1, and I very much agree with that. I'm very happy with the state of the item upgrade system. The one main change that they're making with patch 10.1.5 is they're adding a new track of upgrades for items that drop at 441 item level and above. Those are now on the Myth track, which has 3 ranks, 441, 444, and 447. So all those pieces that dropped at 441 item level or above can be upgraded to 447 item level. This will be a retroactive change as well, so it means that if you got an item from the first boss of Aberrus on Mythic, or from like a plus 16 Mythic plus Great Vault reward, you can upgrade that all the way up to 447 item level by using Aspect's Shadow Flame Crests. That's the only change to gear, really. Hero track items still cap at 441, champion track items still cap at 437, the other items cap at whatever they capped at. Nothing has really changed there. Just 441 and 444 base items can be upgraded to 447. Cool. There's a new type of content being added called Time Rifts. They are outdoor content, and the entrance to the Time Rifts are in the valley east of Valdrakken. They pop up every hour on the hour, and they're up for, I think it's 15 minutes or so. The area where they're located is called Llarold Reservoir on your map. It's pretty much right in the middle of Thaldraszus. It's just east of town. The premise here is that there are trillions of alternate universes collapsing on each other or something like that, and you have to go through the rift and save them. Basically, you do little scenarios. This kind of is like something between the invasion points from Legion, if you remember that. A lot of people don't, or just scenarios from Mists of Pandaria. You do scenarios, you get cosmetic rewards like pets, toys, achievements, titles, all the usual stuff you would expect from WoW. Additionally, you get a currency called Paracausal Flakes, and there's a huge group of vendors just east of the Time Rift entrance, again in that valley in the middle of Thaldraszus, where you can spend all of those flakes on all kinds of cosmetic rewards like mounts, pets, transmogs, and tokens for reputation from past expansions. That's not the only place you can get the Paracausal Flakes. You also get them from killing bosses in Dawn of the Infinites. There is a ton of collectible stuff to be gotten through these Paracausal Flakes, so I'm actually pretty excited about this. I think a lot of the stuff looks really, really good. Okay, now let's talk about nerfs to two pieces of overperforming old gear. This is patch 10.0 gear that's still performing way above its item level. The Onyx Amulet, the ring added in patch 10.0.7 that features gems with direct damage procs. That's still a must-wear for classes like tanks that don't get nearly as much damage from normal rings with secondary stats on them. The damage effects from the Onyx Amulet are all being reduced by 40%. Additionally, Seal of Diurnus Chosen, that's the ring from Aranog and Vault of the Incarnates, which has a chance to apply a fire damage over time effect whenever you deal fire damage, that is being reduced by 25%. Both of these rings way outperform their item level massively for tanks and healers. Like massive overperformance. We're talking, I think if I took the Onyx Amulet on my monk, for example, and replaced it with a 447 item level ring that's perfectly itemized, it would be like a 25 or 2700 DPS loss. That's not great, and while this nerf is definitely a nerf, I'm actually happy about it. For a couple of reasons. Using a 421 ring with a damage proc because it's worth like 1000 DPS more than a well-itemized 447 ring is a bummer, or in the case of the Amulet, like 2700 DPS more, it's a bummer, but I'm sick of wearing rings from last tier. The increase in stat budget and stamina is going to feel nice. Additionally, Blizzard is granting baseline damage increases to all of the tank specs and all the specs that relied on these two rings to compensate for those nerfs, but also to make normal rings scale better and be more appealing. Ultimately, this is going to wind up as a non-change for most of the tank specs. There's a little bit of balancing in there as well. Some of the tank specs that were performing a little better, like Vengeance Demon Hunter and Prop Pally, most notably, are getting a little bit less of a damage buff than some of the tank specs that sucked, like Blood Decay. But in general, all of the tanks are getting a nice big buff to their damage output to compensate for these nerfs. So it'll make things better, not just in the short term, but like significantly better as we progress through the rest of the expansion. We hopefully won't run into this same situation again. Hopefully. In general, I would say mission accomplished on this set of changes. And finally, I'll conclude with some tank class changes, because that's the one area of class changes that I feel pretty knowledgeable about. Blizzard has made some changes to sort of baseline healing spells for hybrids. They've made it so that mana regen is lower, but mana pools are larger, so you're able to do a little bit more burst healing up front, but then not as much sustained healing. I don't really feel any type of way about that at all. I think it's fine. Whatever. Blood Decay, Vengeance Demon Hunter, Prop Pally, and Prop Warrior are all mechanically unchanged. That, like I said before, there's a bit of damage tuning happening with the patch, so that the lower end of tank damage is getting brought up a bit and the higher end is getting reduced a bit, but it's nothing drastic in either direction. There are some major tank changes though, and they're happening to Bear Druid and Brewmaster Monk. Now I intend to do full-scale videos about each of those two tanks since they're undergoing pretty significant sets of changes, but in both cases, they look to be getting big buffs. I'll do the short version here. Bear Druid looks like it's making a return to the old style of thrash spamming, but with more damage than ever, very powerful defenses, and really, really strong self-healing thanks to a humongous buff to their main Frenzied Regeneration talent. There's potential to run Dream of Cenarius and actually spot heal your groups with regrowth as well if you like that style of play, and I think that the Moonfire spamming Galactic Guardian playstyle is still very much on the table. I think there are a couple of potential builds that Bear Druids are going to be running in the future, but it seems like Thrash is definitely going to be a mainstay of any successful Druid build going forward, with Moonfire maybe falling off or maybe still being very comparable, competitive to how it was going forward, just merged in with Thrash being a lot more valuable too. For Brewmaster Monks, it's a bit different from what we expected at the start of this PTR cycle. A new talent, Press the Advantage, was added in as a choice node alongside Weapons of Order. It promised a greatly simplified style of play that could deal substantially more damage. Basically, it worked like this: -2 keybinds, plus 20,000 DPS. Sounded great. Unfortunately, that talent has been nerfed in a variety of ways, and while it may still be usable for players who aren't as comfortable with the full-fledged complex Brewmaster Monk setup, it does look like it's not going to be competitive at the highest end. Instead, Blackout Combo Tiger Palm is going to be the new go-to Brewmaster Monk setup in raids, and maybe some version of that will rise up in Mythic Plus as well. Now, this might seem like a disappointing thing, and I mean, I will admit that I'm a little disappointed too. But Blackout Combo Tiger Palm is not totally new. I loved it in Legion. The difference here is that the class is very, very changed now from how it worked then. You have more keybinds, more abilities, different cooldowns on some of your skills, and the main reason that this playstyle is emerging is a 50% buff to Tiger Palm damage, which kind of slipped under the radar initially, but when you combine all the possible buffs to Tiger Palm in the Brewmaster Monk talent tree, it adds up to a massive amount of damage. I hit a totally unbuffed 75k Tiger Palm crit on a training dummy yesterday while I was working on the Wowhead guide for this, and I hit an 86k crit while I was working on this video. It's very good. It is a definite deviation from the way that Brewmaster Monk has played throughout patch 10.0 and 10.1, but it stands to do a lot more damage than it has up until this point, and probably with the changes to some of the other specs is going to put Brewmaster Monk at the very top of the damage charts among tanks. I am excited about that, can't lie. Even though I maybe would have preferred the other playstyle, if we're at the top of the damage, and it doesn't matter, I'll take that. That works for me. All right, patch 10.1.5 is looking pretty awesome and pretty groundbreaking. We're adding not just a new spec, but a new type of spec with the Augmentation Evoker. That's pretty great. We're adding a new dungeon that I think everybody's gonna like. It looks very cool. The rewards look very cool, and it's definitely gonna be part of either Season 3 or Season 4 of Mythic Plus, so definitely going to get in there and have some fun with it. And then a bunch of other fun new stuff to play around with too. And, you know, even more item level at the highest level of gearing. So, something to aspire to. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.